Well, again, appreciate all the efforts from everybody. And this is just a question about diet. And I've been trying to eat more fiber and doing all the things like a good boy and exercise. But one of the things that I was curious about is, I just came out of transplant and I have to take all these other drugs, penicillin and all this. So like, am I wasting my time trying to get a good, microbiome by eating all these fiber if I'm killing it with antibiotics? I was just curious about that.
So great question, which I don't think I have a good answer to, where antibiotics do affect the microbiome. But I do think that there are two different things you're doing. So patients, like for instance, there are studies looking at patients post-transplant, and the diversity of the microbiome is associated with survival post-transplant. So I'm assuming all those patients on that study had got antibiotics too. But we're still seeing that there's a difference in survival based on diversity of the microbiome. So I think all that you're doing is probably helping. It may be that the antibiotics are not allowing you to let it, like it helping as much as it could without the antibiotics, but I think it's still helping. So I would keep it up and not change that. That would be my thoughts.
And it's never a waste of time to eat healthy for all kinds of reasons.
Well, I just made some pulled pork this weekend, so I beg to differ. I'm joshing you, of course. No, you are correct. This is an online question. Are there plans for any study on the effect of nutrition plant-based diet on time to relapse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little bit of that, there are some challenges around trying to doing that. What you're suggesting would be something where you're doing a study in the first remission until, like, looking at the progression-free survival in somebody who is eating healthy versus not. So we are somewhat doing that with our Nutrivention 4 study, where we are giving patients on the daratumumab or lenalidomide arm 3 months of a diet and going to see the effects of it. What the challenge is that, the time to relapse or progression-free survival is not decades, but many years, approximately 5 on average. So trying to do a study where we're giving meals for 5 years is very difficult. But I think if patients make the changes and sustain them, then we can compare them to patients who don't. So that's what we'll be doing on the Nutrivention 4 study. So we may have some data in the next few years, but also the study that I showed you that, is in press just now, where we showed that patients who have more diversity and more butyrate producers are more likely to have sustained MRD negativity. That you could extrapolate that to say that's because we know longer sustained MRD negativity is associated with longer time to relapse or progression-free survival. So maybe that signal will be there in that study, but that study was small. And so that's why, and because the follow-up's not long enough, we don't have that data in that study yet.
Here's a newsworthy epidemiological question. Has any connection been shown between the aftermath of September 11th in Lower Manhattan and multiple myeloma?
I'm not aware.
So at MSK, we looked at these large looked at the World Trade Center cohorts, like the fire department patients, and showed that patients who have MGUS, firefighters who were exposed to 9/11 were more likely to have MGUS than those who were not exposed to 9/11. So there is a definite increased risk from the 9/11 part. But more recently, also in Blood Cancer Journal, we published where we looked at other populations. So firefighters is thought to have an increased risk because they are also exposed to fumes and smoke and dust and all of that. So is that what's causing it, or was it truly the 9/11 part of it? And what we did in that study is look at other populations like police and other first responders who are not firefighters, because they don't have the exposure otherwise, and also showed that there is some increased risk. So 9/11 is associated. And there is also data on the mechanism from the Einstein or Montefiore group looking at it in leukemia as well, which was published in Nature. So there have been some studies around it. And yes, there is a link. So we see a lot of the patients at MSK through the 9/11 program.
Just as a quick editorial, because I was just thinking of this, many of you have seen on the news when police go into crystal meth labs or something like that, and they put these spacesuits on when they go in. The origin of that policy began with a myeloma patient. There was a firefighter in Portland, Oregon in the 1990s who was diagnosed with myeloma. And when they did studies on them, they realized he was being exposed to so many different types of chemicals through his work. And they determined that for certain types of chemicals, we need to have protective gear for the people that go work in there. So remember that every time you see one of these people in a spacesuit going into one of these places, the point where that began, you can trace it back to a myeloma patient. Here's an interesting, another nutrition question we're getting, which is good. I almost stopped eating red meat and chicken, but eat some fish. How can I get sufficient protein for anemia or to prevent anemia?
So anemia is multifactorial, and there is this myth around that, the only way to improve anemia is to eat red meat. And I don't think that is fully true, because if you're iron deficient, yes, you need to have iron to improve your anemia, or if you're B12 deficient, you need B12. But sometimes the anemia is from other things, whether it's treatment related or something. So you're not going to just raise your blood counts from eating more red meat, which I think a lot of people do, thinking that that's what helps. But also plant-based sources of iron can also help. So it's not that if somebody's eating plant-based diets, they're not getting iron. There's enough iron in beans and things like that. And actually some of that iron there may be some benefits around that kind of iron as well. So to answer the question of what you could eat to get enough protein. So for protein, I think plant-based sources, I think it's quite important to incorporate beans, seeds, nuts into the diet, where I think in the US, beans are very rarely eaten, and in a lot of the world now, because nobody thinks about that. But beans are very easy, like you open a can, or if you cook them, they're one of the cheapest foods. So in terms of, like, people think plant-based diets are expensive, but beans are actually extremely cheap to cook and eat. So learning how to cook beans, or soak them overnight, sprout them and eat them, is one of the most, I think, very important things you can do if you're trying to transition to a plant-based diet, because it's not just about fruits and vegetables alone. And if you're trying to feel full and things, and that's what happens is some people do plant-based diets, just eat salads and fruits, and then say, like, I'm not full, and I'm losing weight and I don't want to do this anymore. But that's because they're probably not doing all the components of it or doing it right. Other foods also, like tofu, seitan, these are things that could also be incorporated.
We've had a question. You've spoken a lot about intermittent fasting. Could you just explain sort of the mechanics of what intermittent fasting is and how to go about it?
Yeah, the studies that I have found on intermittent fasting are, again, very diverse. Where it's very known is in the Islamic world, where there's Ramadan, where they only eat between sun up and down. And that is something where there's a lot of information coming from, where they looked for health benefits. As I said earlier in the talk, there seems to be an effect on fasting makes healthy cells go in a certain metabolic state, where they basically wait until there's nutrition available again, and cancer cells oftentimes have lost this ability. So there's kind of a starvation period. And the length of the fasting is not 100% clear. What is oftentimes used is the 14 and 10 or the 16 and 8. So depending on how long your day is. And did I calculate right? Yeah, I think that's 24. So it should be. I'm getting tired. So those are the ones. So there has to be a longer period of fasting than the time when we are eating. And it should also not be binge eating in the time when you eat. And I have tried that because I will offer it to my patients. So I have to experience myself. My wife did that too. And surprisingly enough, for me, it was much less challenging than a continuous fasting over a longer period of time, and then just starting eating normal again. So this intermittent fasting, I think it helps with being compliant to doing that, to adhering to it. As Uri said earlier, if we do something that's completely unrealistic, we will not do it because it's not realistic. But if we do something that we can do, and this intermittent fasting, in my personal experience, was really doable. And I love food. It works. So that's something, and there seems to be a beneficial effect. And we have to see how that pans out in myeloma patients. The study is going on. And if you want to come by, you can enroll. It's only 1 month that we do it. I was surprised that our nutrition colleague from nutrition said 1 month might be even worth it.
On just a personal note, I started the intermittent fasting about 2 years ago. And so basically what I do is I don't eat for 16 hours and then I eat within an 8-hour period. And I usually starts at, actually it's less than that. I usually eat between noon and 6. And it is really hard in the beginning for the first week or two. And now it's just normal. I mean, I don't get hungry and it's your body adjusts fairly quickly. And I have to say, it's been a big blessing for me. And with that, having shined the light on me at the end, I would like to thank our 3 speakers for the afternoon session. I think we learned a lot today.